Joining me now is Alan Morse. He is the president and CEO of Ritter Communications. Alan, good to be with you, at least by Zoom, and hopefully I will see you in person soon enough. How are you?
Good morning. I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Let's talk about, we got a lot to talk about because this industry that you're in has gone through really just some incredible changes over the last 30 to 40 years, but just in the last 5 years or less, we've seen just some incredible advancements too. Where are we in terms of the era of this industry, in terms of the revolution and the change that the telecommunications industry is going through right now, with for everything from broadband to COVID-19 adaptation and everything in between? What is your sense of perspective on this?
Well, it's certainly been a transformative last few years. We had at Ritter Communications, we had been focused on transforming our company into a regional fiber broadband provider. But our focus prior to the pandemic had been on commercial services. We were expanding fiber with the objective of serving businesses of all sizes across the state of Arkansas. And the pandemic really kind of stood that strategy on its head, and it became clear almost immediately, or I guess the pandemic brought to the forefront the need for residential broadband as people transition to working from home, learning from home, using telemedicine, and so on. And so we pivoted as quickly as we could, and we're now focused on not only commercial broadband, but also expanding fiber to the home and residential broadband around the state. In terms of perspective, I think that pandemic experience, whether it was with our employees or with our customers, I think really brought home to us that the work that we're doing, we think has never been more meaningful, in the sense that it highlighted or illustrated the digital divide around the state and the fact that significant portions of the population didn't have access to the technology that they needed to work from home and to manage the pandemic. But I think it also brought to light that Arkansas needed, better broadband just on a broad basis, on a wholesale basis, to remain competitive economically, and to help rural cities and towns in particular stay relevant, and be able to compete for new businesses, to be able to compete to retain businesses, to retain workers, and also to provide a platform where remote workers can live and may raise their families in places where they want and still have access to employment opportunities.
But let's talk about that pivotal moment when you guys made the decision to go beyond just commercial or business services there. What was the data that you were seeing that made that decision easy for you, or was it high risk when you were looking at it and you just kind of were going with instinct and some data that indicated this was the right thing to do? I think that's a really critical time period for people to understand when they sense a real shift in a potential business model like that.
Thinking back on it, March 2020 and April 2020 were a really interesting time. Nobody really knew what to expect. It was unprecedented. I know that word is almost cliched at this point, but like a lot of businesses, we were looking at the situation. We had sent virtually all of our employees to work from home. We didn't know at that time, given that unemployment had gone up to about 20% almost overnight, we didn't know how many of our customers would be able to pay their bills, or if they had to make a choice about paying their electric bill or their water bill, or buying groceries or whatever else, where paying their communications bill, their broadband bill, their telephone bill would rank in that order of priorities. So, like a lot of companies, we were looking at scenarios where, are we going to have to lay off employees? Is it possible that our revenues might go down 30 or 40%? In line with the unemployment trends and so on. And so, we looked hard at the payroll protection plan, the PPP loans, to see if that was something we should take advantage of. And ultimately, we decided not to do that. But very quickly after that, we were surprised. We started getting lots of calls from people who either had not been customers previously and who wanted to become customers and get a new broadband connection, or they wanted to upgrade their speeds, their packages, et cetera, either on the internet side or on the cable TV side, as people were, looking to have more entertainment options without leaving the house. And so that almost instantaneous increase in demand on the residential side, as a result of the pandemic, really caused us to say, let's take a closer look at residential. And we had always known there was a market for these residential services, but being a relatively small regional provider, we didn't have the resources to do both commercial fiber builds and residential fiber builds. And so prior to the pandemic, we had to pick one, and we picked commercial because at the time the market was valuing those builds at a higher multiple than they value residential builds. The pandemic turned that on its head, like it did a number of things. And all of a sudden our investors and the market in general basically said, hey, given this increased demand, the valuation for residential fiber builds has gone up exponentially. And so let's take a new look at that, see where we might be able to play. And in our case, it was really interesting because having done these commercial fiber builds, we had a fiber backbone in a lot of communities that went right down Main Street. And we already had fiber running from the internet hubs to those little towns and cities around the state. And we could use that as a springboard to allow us to get into these residential services fairly quickly.
Yeah, it's one of my all-time greatest pieces of advice that I dole out is listen to the marketplace. It will tell you what to do every single time. And you guys obviously did that. The other thing that kind of kickstarts a lot of this too is you see the state of Arkansas through some of the federal money that's coming through here start to make major investments as it recognizes consumer habits changing and the need for more broadband in rural parts of Arkansas. This money that's coming for all these build outs, and you guys are one of several telecom companies and broadband companies that have been able to capitalize on that. How important has that been? And do you see the state moving in the right direction with the big broadband plan? It now has all of that data that from Lou McAllister's report in it.
Yeah, so a couple of things on that. One, I probably should take this opportunity to, and got some fire trucks going by, sorry about that, but give some kudos to Governor Hutchinson and his team, and also the Arkansas legislature for the speed with which they jumped on the availability of those funds and got them deployed. So Arkansas was really one of the first states in the country to make use of the CARES Act funds that came out in 2020. And then subsequently the ARPA funds that came out in 2021. I can tell you in just the surrounding states, Tennessee has not made a grant yet. Neither has Texas, neither has Oklahoma, to my knowledge, or Missouri. So Arkansas really jumped on that and took advantage of that opportunity. And, we had seen some studies, and I think the governor had been pointed in his remarks historically about how Arkansas ranked somewhere in the bottom 5 of U.S. states in terms of the reach of broadband to constituents and residents around the state. So I think everybody generally knew there was a digital divide, and when those funds became available, Arkansas really worked to put them to work quickly. And so we were able to help with that, and we think it's important that Arkansas has gotten a jump on some of the surrounding states and moved quickly to address those issues.
My sense in covering all of this is that we do have a very good blueprint and a good plan in place for where this is going to go, and ask for your take on that. And then maybe if you could also add into that the current economic environment that we're in with inflation cost, rising prices on things, interest rate hikes are coming. Does that change this dynamic any?
Well, let me talk about the broadband plan first. I think, so as I mentioned, Arkansas really went out quickly and got funds deployed. I think in that process, there were some successes, and I think we were pleased to be part of some of those successes. I think there were some challenges as well. I think the state had a general idea of the areas they wanted to serve and a general idea of the standards they wanted to apply to the grant recipients and the like. But after experience with the first 2 rounds of funding, I think the state did a good thing in hiring Lou McAllister and his group to go out and do the broadband plan. And one of the great things about that exercise was Lou and his team went around to quite a few communities around the state and talked to people on the ground about what their experience was. They talked to potential customers, they talked to civic leaders, they talked to internet service providers like us, and really got a broad perspective about what was actually going on in the state. And so we think that that effort really informed the eventual plan. We sent comments in on the plan once it was published, and we had some issues with a number of items or suggestions that were made in the plan, and we tried to make some constructive suggestions about how those aspects could be dealt with. But generally speaking, we think it was positive, and we think although we're waiting to see how the rules for the next round of state grants will change based on these recommendations. We expect those rules to come out in the next month or two. Mm-hmm. We think it generally was positive. It was a good exercise, and we think the state is now better informed, and they'll be better able to make productive use of the next round of funding.
And on the current economic environment, is
right.
seeing this having is just going to decrease some of the potential to stretch those dollars further?
Well, there's certainly been cost increases. Obviously, on the consumer side, we see that in gasoline prices and grocery prices and, virtually everything at this point, broad-based inflation. On our side, we see it in supply chain challenges, also increases of materials and particularly electronics that go into the deployment of broadband services around the state. So we've seen delays in the availability of fiber, availability of consumer premise equipment, the actual stuff that goes in your house and sits on a shelf, whether it's a modem or what we call an internet gateway. So not only cost increases, but also supply challenges on those that have slowed us down somewhat. And obviously, that's going to increase the costs of using the state funds in these grant projects. So in addition to that, we've also seen a labor shortage. A number of people left the workforce during the pandemic, either retired early or just decided to stay home with their kids, et cetera. And so the availability of contractors to actually do construction work, laying fiber around the state or stringing fiber across poles in some of these projects has been an issue. And the costs of retaining those contractors have increased. So generally across the board, I think our cost of doing these sorts of fiber builds has gone up somewhere between 15 and 30%. And so obviously that'll mean that the state's funds or the federal funds allocated to the state don't go quite as far as they might have 5 years ago, for example. And so I think, again, going back to the broadband plan, the fact that the state's going to focus now on the areas of greatest need and maybe on the areas that have the highest cost per resident passed in these projects is good. It'll allow them to direct these funds to areas that need it the most.
All right, he's Alan Morse. He is the president and CEO of Ritter Communications. Thanks for the update on everything. Please keep doing the good work that you're doing, and keep us informed the next big move that Ritter Communications make. I feel like I get a press release and some sort of notification from you about every other month on some new market that you're going in or new territory. Congratulations.
Well, thanks. We've got a lot going on, and we're happy and gratified to be able to try to help bridge the digital divide in Arkansas. So Roby, thanks for your time. And as always, good talking to you.